So in our other video about the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, I mentioned that the plot of the story is almost secondary to other big elements or big themes that we see in the book. One of those, the primary element I would say, is the transformation of Eustace from being a record stinker, as Edmund says early in the book, into a dragon, and then his meeting Aslan as a dragon, and Aslan changing him back into a boy who is now ready and willing to be kind to those around him, to be friends with those around him. And we see that transformation throughout the book, you know, from his being mean and a sour disposition into that transformation, and then into that a kinder person in the end. And then there's also a couple other elements of the book that come forth more than the plot of the book. That being the storyline on the Seven Isles, for example. I'm sorry, not Seven Isles. The Lone Islands, for example. The minor plot there of doing away with the slave trade, of deposing Governor Compass on the island and installing Duke Bern as the leader of the Lone Islands now. So that takes place for a few chapters, you know. So it's a minor plot, and then there's another smaller storyline that happens on Island of the Voices, for example. But the plot, you know, that's laid out for us in the book is not really developed much. And let's look at actually what that plot is now. I did mention this, did read it, I think, in the prior video. If you've seen that video, you'll recognize or remember this. Caspian is explaining to the children as they've joined the Dawn Treader what they're all about in their voyage. "That's rather a long story," said Caspian. "Perhaps you'll remember when I was a child, my usurping Uncle Miraz got rid of 7 friends of my father's, who might have taken my part, by sending them off to explore the unknown eastern seas beyond the Lone Islands." "Yes," said Lucy. "None of them ever came back." "Right. Well, on my coronation day, with Aslan's approval, I swore an oath that, if once I established peace in Narnia, I would sail east myself for a year and a day to find my father's friends, or to learn of their deaths and avenge them if I could." So there, Caspian is simply summarizing what their whole purpose is in sailing east. So while that is their purpose, along the way they encounter several other things that seem to be talked about much more than the actually discovery of the lords. Yes, we discover all the lords in the book, but their background isn't really discussed. What I wanted to do now, or in this video, is to look at the discovery of those lords, to maybe hypothesize, or to infer, or to just to, you know, think about how, you know, what could have happened to them in the end that they came to. What could have, how they could have ended up in that situation, because again, you know, we're not told, you know, why they were where they were found, and there's some mystery behind it, you know, without having that background there. To understand some of that, let's go back actually and look at the reference made to the 7 lost lords in Prince Caspian. Prince Caspian being the story that takes place just before the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. In this book, we have the tale of Prince Caspian being the rightful heir to the throne, who's usurping Uncle Miraz, as we saw in, or as he mentioned in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Miraz trying to ascend to the throne, and trying to get all of those people who would either defend Caspian or take his side, get them out of the way. So early on in the book of Prince Caspian, Caspian has a tutor, Dr. Cornelius, who gives him history lessons into Narnia, into the actual true history of Narnia, the history that the Telmarines don't don't explain to him. And Cornelius says, Miraz is a usurper. When he first began to rule, he did not even pretend to be king. He called himself Lord Protector. But then your royal mother died, the good queen and the only Telmarine who was ever kind to me. And then one by one, all of the great lords who had known your father died or disappeared. Not by accident either. Miraz weeded them out. Belisar and Uvalis he shot with arrows on a hunting party, by chance, it was pretended. All the great house of the Passerids he sent to fight the giants on the northern frontier, until one by one they fell. Arlian and Aramon, and a dozen more he executed for treason on false charges. The 2 brothers of Beaversdam he shut up as madmen. And finally he persuaded the 7 noble lords, who alone among all the Telmarines did not fear the sea, to sail away and to look for lands beyond the eastern ocean. And as he intended, they never came back. And when there was no one left who could speak a word for you, then his flatterers, as he instructed them, begged him to become king, and of course he did. So that's a brief glimpse into a little bit of the history of the 7 noble lords who are the plot of Voyage of the Dawn Treader. But just in reading this, you can see, just in reading this, there is such a storyline that could be built off of all of these little references to these people that Miraz weeded out. So it's really amazing, that there's these references in here, but there's no story ever told about who these were. And I think that similarly, the references to the Lost Lords in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader could also be definitely expounded upon. There's probably a lot of backstory that we could have on these. So that's why I wanted to just to look at the discovery of the Lords and to think through, how did they get there? What might have been the story about how they got there and how they ended up, or what happened to them. The first Lord that they find is the Lord Bern. As mentioned, he becomes Duke of the Lone Islands. Bern has probably the happiest outcome of the story, or of the lords in the book. He's the one they find alive and well. They find others alive, but maybe not well. He is alive and well, living on the Lone Islands. Let's see here. He finds Caspian, or maybe vice versa. Caspian finds him when they first arrive at the Lone Islands. And Caspian and Edmund and Lucy and Eustace are captured by the slave traders. And Bern encounters the slave traders, and he buys Caspian. And he explains to Caspian why. He says, "You needn't be afraid of me, boy," he said. "I'll treat you well. I bought you for your face. You remind me of someone." "May I ask of whom, my lord?" said Caspian. "You remind me of my master, King Caspian of Narnia." And then Caspian decided to risk everything on one stroke. "My lord," he said, "I am your master. I am Caspian, King of Narnia." "You make very free," said the other. "How shall I know this is true?" "Firstly, by my face," said Caspian. "Secondly, because I know within 6 guesses who you are. You are one of the 7 lords of Narnia, whom my uncle Miraz sent to sea, and whom I have come out to look for. Argoz, Bern, Ostecian, Restimar, Mavramorn, or Rhoop." "By heaven," exclaimed the man, "it is his father's very voice and trick of speech." "My liege, your majesty," and there in the field he knelt and kissed the king's hand. I'll just keep on going here a little bit. Bern explains a little bit about why he ended up on the Lone Islands. "My Lord Bern," said Caspian, "we must talk of the state of these Lone Islands. But first, what is your own story?" "Short enough, sire," said Bern. "I came thus far with my 6 fellows, loved a girl of the islands, felt I had enough of the sea, and there was no purpose in returning to Narnia while your majesty's uncle held the reins. So I married, and have lived here ever since." So, as mentioned, that is, there's probably a story in and of itself right there. Bern Bern had sailed all the way to the Lone Islands, and as we saw in the other video, it took them 30 days, to get to the Lone Islands. So within that 30-day time span, Bern had had enough of the sea, I guess, and as anyone can, fall in love with the girl. He decided, what's the use of going back to Narnia? I don't want to keep going on sailing to the east. I love this girl. I'm just going to settle here, marry, have a good life. When Caspian and the crew of the Dawn Treader are ready to depart from the Lone Islands, Bern says something interesting as well. Let's look at that. Caspian and Bern are talking. Bern says he could only tell them that his 6 companions sailed away to the eastward and that nothing had ever been heard of them again. He said this when he and Caspian were standing on the highest point of Argoz, looking down on the eastern ocean. I've often been up here of a morning, said the Duke, and seen the sun coming up out of the sea. Sometimes it looked as if it were only a couple miles away, and I've wondered about my friends. I wondered what really is behind the horizon. Nothing, most likely. Yet I'm always half ashamed that I stayed behind. One thing I find interesting in that comment, or in that description to Caspian, is that Bern calls the other 6 lords, his friends. He says, he'd seen his 6 companions sail away, and he wondered about what happened to his friends. So simply calling them his friends in that context, I can imagine that he and the other noble lords of Narnia were maybe good buddies. They maybe they were of a special class. And as they ascended to that class, they got to know one another, and they got to know or develop bonds and develop friendships. And maybe it was difficult, for Caspian or for Bern to watch them sail away, and know that he's staying behind. Moving on from Bern, we next discover Ostecian on Dragon Island. So this is where Eustace turns into a dragon, as mentioned. Eustace goes off and leaves the others on the shore to, in selfish reason, to, just to get away from having to do the work that others are doing. And he finds this lonely valley in the mountain country of the island, and he actually sees a dragon there who's in its last dying breaths and drinking at a pool, and then he actually dies. And a storm comes through, I believe, and Eustace takes shelter in the dragon's cave. And there, in his heart, finding the gold and having selfish dragonish thoughts, it says that he turns into a dragon. He then, once he wakes up from his nap, and I should mention part of that those selfish dragonish thoughts is that he takes, he sees the gold that he's lying on. He finds an armband, a golden armband, and he shoves it up on his arm, and it's large enough that it's too loose, so he puts it up above his elbow. And when he wakes up, he finds that his arm is throbbing, and he discovers he's a dragon, and he sees that the armband his new dragon arm is too large for that armband, and it's swelling around the armband. Eventually, he goes back to the camp on the shore, and where the others see him, and they eventually approach him to talk to him. And as they approach him, Caspian says, "Look." He was staring at the bracelet. "Look at what?" said Edmund. "Look at the device on that gold," said Caspian. Drinian looked, and he said, "A little hammer with a diamond above it, like a star. Why, I've seen that before." "Seen it?" said Caspian. "Why, of course you have. It's the sign of the great Narnian house. This is the Lord Ostecian's arm ring." "Villain," said Reepicheep to the dragon, "have you devoured our Narnian lord?" But the dragon shook his head violently. "Perhaps," said Lucy, "this is the Lord Ostecian, turned into a dragon under an enchantment, "Needn't be either," said Edmund. "All dragons collect gold, but I think it's a safe guess that Ostecian got no further than this island." So we don't know. It's never really figured out whether the dead dragon was Ostecian. Possibly Ostecian was simply captured and eaten by that dead dragon. We don't know. But as Edmund said, it's safe to say Ostecian never left the island. If he wore that armband all the time, maybe he did, maybe not. I just thought of this, but if he wore that armband and he turned into a dragon, he would have the same problem that Eustace has with it swollen on his arm. However, if he was eaten by the dragon that lived there, then the armband would have come off, I suppose. So I had not thought about that until this moment. And maybe that's what actually happened to him. But there's backstory there. Why is it that Ostecian was captured by the dragon and all the other lords escaped? Nothing's ever said since then about that. But going along with that thought about Ostecian being captured and eaten, maybe when they landed there on the island, that dragon was roaming about and he attacked the ship for all we know, and maybe he captured Ostecian and the others were like, let's get out of here, before he captures anybody else. So that's a possibility, I guess, but again, we're not told. So it's just inferences or assumptions we have to make. There's one more thing about Ostecian I wanted to look at the end of that chapter, when they left the island. It says, people wondered whether the other dragon had killed the Lord Ostecian several years ago, or whether Ostecian himself had been the old dragon. The jewels which Edmund had crammed into his pockets in the cave had disappeared, along with the clothes that he had been wearing. But no one, least of all Eustace himself, felt any desire to go back to that valley for more treasure. In a few days now, the Dawn Treader, remasted, repainted, and well stored, was ready to sail. Before they embarked, Caspian caused to be cut on a smooth cliff face, facing the bay, the words, "Dragon Island, discovered by Caspian X, King of Narnia, etc., in the 4th year of his reign. Here, as we suppose, the Lord Ostecian had his death." So, if Ostecian came to a miserable end, well, he did. Whether he was eaten or he turned into a dragon, a fitting epitaph that Caspian had inscribed on the cliff walls. The next discovery is that of Restimar on Deathwater Island. Now, they don't find out that it's Restimar at that time. They discover that later by inference. It's determining who the other lords are. So on Deathwater Island, they discover a pool. And we'll start reading here. They all sat down, but one, who was Edmund, jumped up again very quickly. "You're going for sharp stones on this island," he said, groping about in the heather. "Where is the wretched thing? Ah, now I've got it. Hello, it wasn't a stone after all. It's a sword hilt. By Jove, it's a whole sword. What the rest is left of it. It must have lain here for ages." "Narnian too, by the look of it," said Caspian, as they crowded around. "I'm sitting on something too," said Lucy. "Something hard." It turned out to be the remains of a mail shirt. By this time everyone was on their hands and knees, feeling in the thick layer of heather in every direction. The shirts revealed one by one a helmet, a dagger, a few coins, not Calormene crescents, but genuine Narnian lions and trees, such as you might see any day in the marketplace of Beaverstan. "Looks as if this might be all that's left of one of our 7 lords," said Edmund. "Just what I was thinking," said Caspian. "Wonder which one it was. There's nothing on the dagger to show, and I wonder how he died." Well, his death is discovered, or how he died is discovered later on in the book. So they find what they assume is a statue at the bottom of a pool. They look down at the pool, into the pool, and there on the bottom is this golden-colored statue. They assume it's the rays of the sun going through the water kind of are turning things to the color of gold. However, what they really determine in the end is that things that are dipped into that water or fall into that water turn instantly into gold, into solid gold. And so it says, that poor fellow on the bottom, well, you see. So it isn't a statue at all, said Lucy in a low voice. No, the whole thing is plain now. He was here on a hot day. He undressed at the top of the cliff where he was sitting. The clothes have rotten away or been taken by birds to line nests with. The armor's still there. Then he dived. Oh, don't, said Lucy. What a horrible thing. So, Restimar, on a hot day when they arrived at that island, presumably, found the pool, said, hey, there's a beautiful pool. Take a nice dip in the pool and cool off. He dives in, and that's the end of Restimar. Turns into solid gold when he hits the water. Yes, what a horrible end, though, I would say, with Lucy. But as we mentioned, they don't realize it's Restimar at this time. Nothing they find clues them into the fact that it's Restimar. They find that after a while. The next island they come to is the Island of the Voices. And here they meet Koryakan the magician, and they go through their adventure on the Island of the Voices. As I mentioned, it's type of a subplot within the book. There's this little storyline that happens on the Island of the Voices. And the only thing that we learned about in the last 4 lords now, we've discovered Bern and Ostecian and the one on Deathwater Island, so there's 4 left. The only thing we know about them is at the end of their adventure on the Island of the Voices, and that is by what Koryakan the magician says. So Koryakan says that about 7 years before, a Narnian ship had put in at his waters, and that she had on board the Lords Revilian, Argoz, Mavramorn, and Rhoop. So they judged that the golden man they had seen lying in Deathwater must be the Lord Restimar. And so, kind of, going back to our theme, why is it that Restimar was the only man that jumped in, that jumped into the pool? Did the others go to the pool with him? Did he go up there on his own? It's my thought as I was thinking through it that, had he gone on his own, he wouldn't have come back, obviously. And the others would have been like, well, where is this guy? Or not this guy, he was their friend. And where's Restimar? They would have gone out looking for him. And, as we saw in the other video, Deathwater Island was a small island, 20 acres in extent. Probably not a lot of places that you could not, scour the island and try to find him. And I would assume that they would have seen him in the pool. And seeing him lying there at the bottom of the pool, and that was the interesting thing about the statue, what they assumed was a statue. The statue was in the form of a man with his hands over his head like this, diving. And had they seen that on the bottom of the pool? And, if they could tell maybe by his facial characteristics, that's Restimar. Why is he lying at the bottom of the pool like that, And from there, they might have discovered, good grief, he turned into solid gold, Or at the same time, let's say they had all gone to the pool together, They discovered the pool. Restimar is the first one to dive in. Maybe the others are getting ready to dive, and they're like, wait, don't dive. Look what happened to him, I guess, in reality, thinking about it, it's a gruesome, terrible end, just like we saw with Ostecian, either being eaten by the dragon or turning into the dragon. So, it's those things, though, that I wanted to try to think through, as to why is it that these men were left individually along these different islands, The next lord we find is Rhoop. And same thing, he is left alone in this place. And probably the saddest story, yes, the other 2 died, but Rhoop suffered a great deal more than death, in Dark Island. Let me read that then. So on Dark Island, we'll read a little bit about why it's called Dark Island. Well, I guess first, they are approaching this island off in the distance, and it's much different looking because it's just a shadow, a mist on the sea, It doesn't have any shape or form. And as they're approaching it, they slowly are sailing closer and closer, and they are entering this darkness all around them. It's I think someone described it as if you're entering a train tunnel. When initially it's very clear, and then you get this very brief moment of kind of a mixture of the darkness and the light fighting behind you, and then all of a sudden you're enveloped in darkness. And there's the lights, the leading lights on the ship that are lit, and that's all you can see, just dim glowing leading lights, and all around you is darkness. And then suddenly, from somewhere, no one's sense of direction was very clear by now, there came a cry, either of some inhuman voice, or else the voice of one in such extremity of terror that he had almost lost his humanity. So that's what I mentioned, when we talk about Rhoop. "Mercy!" cried the voice. "Mercy! Even if you are only a mere dream, have mercy! Take me on board, take me, even if you strike me dead. But in the name of all mercies, do not fade away and leave me in this horrible land." "Who are you?" shouted Caspian. Come aboard and welcome." There came another cry, whether of joy or terror, and then they saw that someone was swimming towards them. "Stand by to heave him up, men," said Caspian. "Aye, aye, your majesty," said the sailors. Several crowded to the port bulwark with ropes, and one, leaning far out over the side, held a torch. A wild white face appeared in the blackness of the water. And then, after some scrambling and pulling, a dozen friendly hands heaved the stranger on board. Edmund thought he had never seen a wilder-looking man. Though he did not otherwise look old, his hair was an untidy mop of white, his face was thin and drawn, and as for clothing, only a few wet rags hung about him. What one mainly noticed were his eyes, which were so widely open that he seemed to have no eyelids at all, stared as if in agony, pure fear. The moment his feet touched the deck, he said, "Fly! Fly about with your ship and fly! Row! Row for your lives away from this accursed shore!" So, this is where we find out that Dark Island, the reason that Rhoop is so terrified looking, a man of, like it said, an inhuman voice, or someone in such an extremity of terror. This is a place where dreams, not dreams, but nightmares come true. So just imagine, it said on Koryakin's island that, or Koryakin said that 7 years before they had left his island, and they had gone on, and if they came to Dark Island not too long after that, then poor Rhoop must have been there for 7 years suffering terrors and nightmares that come true in this place, in a dark, enveloped in darkness, and probably never seen the sun. What a miserable place to be. So why is it that Rhoop alone was there? That's one thing that I thought through, and I couldn't come up with a good theory as to why he alone would have been left there. Why would companions, and especially if a man in such terror, why would they leave him behind? There must be some reason why, he got left behind on that place. But there's not a lot of things that you can infer from that. There's not enough other evidence around, like an armband or a golden man lying in a pool, to infer why it might have happened that he got left alone there. But thankfully, they were able to rescue him. They took him on to Ramandu's island. There on Ramandu's island, he finally found the sleep that he desired. So let's look at Ramandu's island a little bit. They find the rest of the lords, the 3 remaining lords, there at Ramandu's island. This is, in our prior video, we saw the table laid with the tablecloth and the food. We saw the men there. In the description, I don't know if we read about that about the men sleeping at the table, but what had happened was they had well, I guess the backstory is there at Ramandu's island, they found the table. The lords found the table as well. The stone knife that was used to slay Aslan in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was there, and they were arguing among themselves. They grabbed the knife, in the heat of the argument. They grabbed that knife, and instantly they all fall into an enchanted sleep, and they sit at the table there sleeping, sleeping away for 7 years. Their hair is growing out, and it's trailing along the table, over the edge of the table. One thing I thought was interesting was, that think about what they had gone through up to this point. They had seen their companions. They had seen their companions die, by either being killed by a dragon, or turning into gold in a pool, losing a companion to Dark Island. And what must have been their mental state at this point. And that's probably what led into their argument, I would suppose. They've seen so much difficulties along the way that they were willing to pick up a knife and come to deathly blows, because of the challenges they've gone through up until this point. At one point, they tried to wake the men up, and they think, well, maybe they're there to break the enchantment, to wake them up. So Caspian begins shaking the nearest of the three sleepers. For a moment, everyone thought he was going to be successful, for the man breathed hard and muttered, "I'll go eastward no more. Out oars for Narnia." But he sank almost at once into a yet deeper sleep than before. And with the second, it was much the same. He said, "Weren't born to live like animals. Get to the east while you still have a chance. Lands beyond the sun." And he sank down. And the third only said, "Mustard, please," and slept hard. So, they're right there. They kind of shows their disagreement that they have. One of them wants to continue sailing east, one of them wants to go back to Narnia, and the other one is probably happy to sit there and eat. So we discover the last three lords on Ramandu's island sleeping. Now Ramandu does say that the enchantment can be broken. What they must do is, Caspian and his crew, what they must do is to continue sailing on, and to get to the utter east, to leave one member of the crew behind and then to come back. Which they do. Reepicheep stays behind. And in the very, very last page of the book, it talks about what happened then. It says only two more things need to be told. One is that Caspian and his men all got safely back to Ramandu's island, and the three lords woke up from their sleep. And that's it. Nothing more is said about the lords, the lost lords of Narnia. Other than that, it's interesting that it says three lords, not four. Maybe it meant that the enchantment, was broken. And Rhoop was not under enchantment. He was simply helped to fall asleep by Ramandu. But what is interesting, though, is that there's that brief sentence, but then it goes on to tell about Eustace, and mention about, how Eustace is the transformation of Eustace in the book is a much more elaborated on story. It's a theme that's built much more and culminates more with Aslan himself and being involved in helping him to turn from a dragon back into a boy again, and then to start to develop a much better personality, become a much kinder person. And it ends with some commentary on Eustace. So that's just kind of, it's reflective of the fact that the lords of the seven lost lords, and seeking them and trying to find them, that story is not developed much. It's much more focused on Eustace and on other elements within the book. So I'm glad we took time to look at what might have happened to the lords, and it's good to do that. I think not to honor their memory in a sense. So a couple of them passed away, one of them suffered greatly, and the other three were finally broken from their enchanted sleep. And it's just good to kind of think through, what might have been the backstory for those lords. Thank you for watching.